Well, welcome to our first lesson in Bible backgrounds. Our lesson today will be on Old Testament archaeology. And we'll be looking at some highlights. Now, you should have already seen the two teaching videos before this and listing some of the top 10 archaeological finds from a biblical perspective. And today I want to go through just 4 of those with you, 4 highlights. And I'm going to be making some comments on them. And so the first one is the Tel Dan inscription. And this inscription is very important. It was found at Tel Dan in the northern part of Israel. And you can see the inscription here more clearly in the artist's representation of it. It was found at a place called Tel Dan in the northern part of Israel, northernmost part of Israel, written by an Aramean ruler. His name is not mentioned. Quite possibly he was the king of Damascus. The text was written in Old Aramaic, and the reason why it's significant is because it is the oldest or earliest reference outside of the Bible to the Davidic dynasty. The inscription reads this way: Ahaziah, son of Jehoram, king of the house of David. That's the important part for us. The inscription is much longer. So it shows that David had a house, a dynasty. We conclude this from the mention of kings. And for many years, critics of the Bible said that David really wasn't a king because there was no kingdom at that time period. They concluded this was because there were no remains from the Davidic time period that would indicate that he had such a kingdom. And there was no mention of David in any of the extra biblical records. But this find that mentions the house of David, kingdom of David. This silenced many of the skeptics, as did the findings at another place called Khirbet Qeiyafa in the Shephelah of Israel, where they found fortifications from the time period of David, indicating that David really did have a kingdom. These weren't small houses, small buildings, but structures that could have only been made under the organization of a nation. So this has done a lot to silence a lot of the skeptics who said, oh no, David, that's just a made-up story. But indeed, the records show that David was indeed a king, and he had a house or a dynasty. Well, the next archaeological find that we're going to take a look at is Hezekiah's tunnel. And King Hezekiah lived in the 8th century, towards the end of the 8th century, and he was aware of the threat of the Assyrians. In fact, Israel, the kingdom of Israel to the north, had fallen about 20 years earlier, and basically the kingdom of Israel was no more, and he was feeling Assyria threatening his kingdom and even the city of Jerusalem. And he knew he had to prepare for this. So he wanted to get things ready, and one of the most important things that he needed to protect was his water source in Jerusalem. It's the Gihon Spring. But the problem with the location of the Gihon Spring is that it's down low. And if you put your walls around the city enclosing the spring, then that means your walls are going to be very low. And that's really hard to defend a city with walls down low. You want your walls up high. That's the best way to protect a city. So Hezekiah wanted to conceal the entrance to that spring, dig a tunnel, bring the water inside the city where people could safely fetch water. So that was his goal. So they built a tunnel. It was over 530 meters long. And we see here it starts at the Gihon Spring. In this diagram, it's the blue line, and you can see it kind of takes an S shape as it winds its way underneath the Ophel Hill and ends up at a place later to be called the Pool of Siloam. In this diagram, you can see the blue line there. That would indicate Hezekiah's tunnel, deep inside the hill of Jerusalem at that time, and starts at the Gihon Spring and ends up at the pool in the foreground of the picture. Now we know about this tunnel, and because there was an inscription right inside the tunnel, and it indicates how it was made and for what purpose it was made. We call it the Siloam inscription, and it's written in an older Paleo-Hebrew script. So if you studied Hebrew at IGSL, you probably won't be able to read this. These characters are not like the characters that we study in our biblical Hebrew class. But this inscription, we'll see it here where the letters are written clearly by an artist. We read in this inscription that the diggers started at opposite ends and they met in the middle. In fact, the inscription mentions that as they got closer and closer, they could actually hear the axes of the other workers, pickaxes, striking the rock, and then they finally broke through. And so that was all recorded on the Siloam inscription. This was the place of the original inscription. It's not there now. It was taken away and moved to a museum. But that's where it was originally found. And this particular place is the place of meeting, where the two groups of workers met in the center in this tunnel. What a marvelous feat of engineering to be able to dig this through rock underneath the city of Jerusalem. Well, the scriptures mention about the construction of Hezekiah's tunnel. It's from 2 Chronicles 32, 2 through 4, and it's also mentioned in 2 Kings chapter 2, verse 20. Let me read 2 Chronicles 32, 2 through 4. Now when Hezekiah saw that Sennacherib had come, and that he intended to make war on Jerusalem, he decided with his officers and his warriors to cut off the supply of water from the springs which were outside the city, and they helped him. So many people assembled and stopped up all the springs and the stream which flowed through the region, saying, "Why should the kings of Assyria come and find abundant water?" Ketef Hinnom inscription. And this was a small piece of jewelry, an amulet that was found in some caves, really just across the Hinnom Valley from where the school I studied in Jerusalem. And it's made of two tiny silver scrolls. The combined length of these two scrolls is only about 136 millimeters, and so it's quite small. This is what it looked like before it was unrolled. Here we see the archaeologist, Dr. Gabriel Barkai, the one who found the silver amulets near these caves at Ketef Hinnom. And actually Dr. Barkai was one of my teachers at the school where I studied, called the Institute of Holy Land Studies, back in 1982 and 1983. And I had Dr. Barkai for some courses in Jerusalem archaeology. He's known today as one of the foremost scholars in Jerusalem archaeology. And this picture was taken probably about 2003 when I went back for a 20-year reunion and was able to see Dr. Barkai again there. Okay, our last find that we're going to take a look at is probably known to almost all of you, the Dead Sea Scrolls. And this is the great Isaiah scroll All 66 chapters of the book of Isaiah is present in this scroll. You can see how well preserved it is. The text is easily readable if you understand the ancient characters. And the Dead Sea Scrolls have been described as the greatest archaeological find of the 20th century, of any type of find, not just biblical. Just an amazing find. And the reason why the Dead Sea Scrolls are so important is that before the finding of the Dead Sea Scrolls, our oldest major manuscript of the Old Testament dated to about AD 900. And we know that the Old Testament was completed around 400 BC. So that leaves a huge gap of time, 900 AD all the way back to 400 BC, from when the Old Testament originally was completed and when we have our oldest manuscript. But after the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, that pushed back our oldest manuscript to about 100 BC, or 1,000 years earlier than the previous text that we use. So this was a very, very significant find. It really silenced a lot of the skeptics that said, oh, the Bible changed a lot, the scribes must have made errors, and over that 1,000-year period. But we see that the Masoretes who copied the scriptures were very, very careful. And the text of the Dead Sea Scrolls only differs from the text from AD 900, only in small details. Sometimes it's just a matter of spelling, which things change over time. So it really confirmed how well our manuscripts of the Old Testament have been transmitted down through the centuries. So it's very, very significant for biblical studies. This is the community where it was found, the Qumran community. Some people lived there, lived kind of a monastic lifestyle, wanted to get away from what they felt the corrupt religion of Jerusalem. And so they settled on the northwest shore of the Dead Sea, as you can see in this picture. And kind of a desolate place, but a good place if you want to get away from people. And as the Romans had already destroyed Jerusalem, they were working their way down to Masada. This was about AD 70. The people of Qumran realized these Romans are going to come, they're going to desecrate our scriptures, we need to hide them. And so they put them in caves, secret caves, all around the countryside from the site of Qumran to protect them from the Romans. And later those scrolls were found in those caves. Here's cave 4, where the great Isaiah scroll was found. And we'll take a closer look at cave 4. Now remember, the people at Qumran were hiding these scrolls. So this entrance that you see now probably wasn't there 2,000 years ago. Probably erosion has created openings, and now we can have access to some of these caves. But originally they meant to hide the scrolls. I don't think they would have put them in such a place where it would be easy to find. The scrolls were in jars. They were rolled up, put in jars. And the story goes that a shepherd boy, let's call him a lazy shepherd boy, was watching his sheep one day. One got away, climbed up into a cave, and so the shepherd boy, rather than going up, climbing up the hill, getting inside the cave to fetch his sheep, he decided, I'll just throw a rock over there and scare the sheep out of the cave. But instead of the rock simply making a thud on the floor of the cave, he heard something break, a crack. And so he went up to investigate, and turns out one of these clay pots where the Dead Sea Scrolls were stored was accidentally broken by this shepherd boy. And so he took those scrolls to a dealer, an antiquities dealer in Bethlehem, and they tried to sell the scrolls. But we'll pick up that story a little bit later. I want you to notice the shape of the lid of the scroll jars. Okay, you got that shape in your mind? When they wanted to design a building to house the Dead Sea Scrolls, they designed it in the same shape as the jars that the scrolls were found in. This is called the Shrine of the Book. It's at the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. And inside that building that looks like the cover of the scroll jars, we can see the great Isaiah scroll on display, all 66 chapters. You can walk around it and look at it and read it if you're able, and just an amazing find of how the scrolls were preserved. Nobody really thought that scrolls like this could be preserved for 2,000 years. Well, back to the story of the finding of the Dead Sea Scrolls. So they were in the antiquities market in Bethlehem. They weren't getting the money that they hoped for, and they decided to run an ad in America in a major newspaper called the Wall Street Journal. And an archaeologist by the name of Yigal Yadin saw this advertisement for Dead Sea Scrolls dating back to at least 200 BC. And so he decided to investigate, got in negotiations with these antiquities dealers, and the state of Israel was able to purchase the Dead Sea Scrolls. And over time they were able to purchase other scrolls that were found in other caves. Well, this is looking out from one of those caves where the Dead Sea Scrolls was found, looking down on the community, and then we can see the Dead Sea in the background. Well, one thing I want to point out to you, a great resource. You definitely need to check out this resource, and that is Google Arts and Culture. Google Arts and Culture. And there, what they've done is they've basically taken you on museum tours throughout the world. They've gone to these museums and they've taken high quality, high resolution photographs of museum pieces like the Dead Sea Scrolls. And these aren't the typical stuff that you see on the internet, you know, where the quality is really poor. These are super high quality. In fact, what you see here on the screen is the detail of the great Isaiah scroll, and you can read the letters. You can see how high quality. I really zoomed in on this one because I wanted you to see the quality, but you can go to museums in Europe and other places, so definitely check out Google Arts and Culture. It's a great resource. Just type in whatever you want to find, and there's a good chance you'll be able to find what you're looking for and see it in high quality images. Well, that concludes our lesson on Old Testament archaeology. Please, you'll find the assignment. I want you to respond to those things that you've looked at, and you can post that on Moodle. Thank you.